Dear students, our today lecture is about international disaster management or the international phenomena process of the disaster management. So, in today's lecture, our discussion outline is about international phenomena or process of the disaster management. What actually the introduction based elaboration and in the brief about what's actually international disaster management and what can be processes in that disaster management, what are the bases behind that disaster measure in on international level if there are such disaster occur, because we know about the disaster four phases. That's the basic phases for the disaster components of management in the last topic or lecture. So we will go from the international level based implementation of that processes or components for that process or phenomena of disaster management. Up next, we will know about the national disaster management participant. Who are the participants during the management of the international disaster to plan the disaster management at the international level. And the third will be the governance. What are the the governance policies and the stats that can be mentioned during the implementation of disaster management laws and policies and other kind of rules. So in disaster governance is also the part of that international disaster management. So let's move towards the international phenomena process of the disaster management. What's actually international disaster management? The study of the It's actually the study of diverse emergency disaster management system, or all the components that we have know about the recovery, preparedness, mitigation, and the disaster response. So in that basis, the structure that exists throughout the world, that are in the regional, local, or in any organizational level or any implemented base in the disaster management throughout the world, and also the study of disaster management in scenarios where the capacity of single nation even can't respond on the basis of mechanisms and that are overwhelmed. That is not that much responsive. So in that case, international disaster management is required to implement for the better management, and so to implement all the components that we have studied before, that are recovery, preparedness. Up next is the preparedness, the recovery, response, and better mitigation of that to disaster management system. So based on that, vulnerabilities and the root cause of such disasters can be implemented. Like on that basis, on that disaster management, international disaster management, it is actually based on that basic components are parameters to know about, to analyze what to go for and take steps in vulnerability and the root cause of such disasters. What are the vulnerabilities for that and root cause or basis for that disaster? The perception of risks and the methods used to identify and analyze it. What are the risks related to that disasters, and also methods to assess, to identify, to mitigate, and then to finally to analyze it. The institutions or systems or other kind of organization and structure functional basis units that are created to manage certain kind of risk, disaster risk. And then the statutory authorities are statutory, that's are national or international, either they are private or in the public sector, to guide the management of risk, and there are a guide for the management of risk. So that's based on the international disaster management. And up next is the mechanisms that is developed to respond to disaster and the response capacity of those mechanisms. So overall these are based toward the study of the diverse emergency disaster management systems. All these are being on the under umbrella of on the platform of the disaster management system on international level. To know about that these factors, so if you go to implement these factors, we will know about all these to go for the international disaster management. Up next, we will study important aspect. What are the international disaster management participants? So here we will elaborate one by one. Victims, obviously, and if somewhere the disaster, some site or some area or any confined place, the disaster occur, any kind of disaster there, either natural or anthropogenic. So victims will be the first participants because we will know the victims who are the actually victims in that certain disaster. After that, obviously to that disasters we will respond. Who are the local first responders to that victims in that if certain area or disaster area and that is vulnerable in this disaster risk based vulnerable area that prone area that has been the effect of that disaster, who are the local responders to that victims of the disaster. Up next comes the governments of the affected countries, who are the what are the governments of either they are local level, like I mean like in that sense if you go for the local government, like that's a regional basis, either a provincial government like or state basis, or that is going toward the federal level. Like if we take the example here, the regional provincial disaster management PDM is here, federal disaster management is that is NDMA, like National Disaster Management Authority is there. So they are the governments for that affected countries or for the affected of the disaster area, so which comes under that disaster prone area, that disaster affected country. So that are the governments, who are the governments of that country. Up next with the governments of the other countries, how the other governments are responding to that victims. So like in that sense, governments of the other country related to that area, like if the earthquake occurs in Pakistan, it affects also maybe the other countries, how much aftershocks are felt in other countries, or either this is only confined to that country. So how the governments of other countries are responding, what are their framework in collaboration or in response to that kind of disaster for that victims of that country, the affected country. So up next, the disaster management participants will be the international organization, who and which kind of international organizations are responding to certain disaster or that areas. Like if we go for International Red Cross, so they are mostly responding to many victims and to the local response and to help in many kind of disaster related to activities, they give the medical care and kind of response to the any kind of disasters. In that sense, they are making that part of international organization. And up next goes for the international financial institution that also come in the framework for international organization. The institutions organization who are providing financial support to the victims of the affected countries. So in that sense, international financial institutions will be the part and participants of the international disaster management. The other important aspect is the regional organization, how they are responding, what are their role in that aspect. They are also the participants of international disaster management because they can better give response or better will be available to respond and recover, and after all they will be in the long term phase to recover in the all kind of activities of that disaster area. And also the situations related to with the regional organization or the regional institutions that are developed, like we see the social welfare institutions or social welfare societies are there in many, even the local village or in the rural areas, they respond to certain kind of disasters. So that's also very important and very basic factor to be respond as the local first responders. So other non-profit organizations are like that can be the national national government organization or non-government or non-profit government organization. Either they will be NGOs like non-government organization or non-profit organization, as well as INGOs like international non-government organization. They will be there, like I have discussed here is the ICRC or even other responders like a Muslim Aid are there. Other you can mention here many such kind of organization who are there to respond to some kind of disaster. So they are the very key participants of the international disaster management in that aspect. However, what are the private organization and business industries who are also giving such a response to that kind of disaster, or who are playing their role in disaster management, international disaster management? What are their role and what they are doing? And so in that basis, and their benefits base, which they are going giving response to that some kind of disaster, they are also the key part of that international disaster management. Last but not least, that come again the local and regional donors. They are like the first responders to that victims are affected countries affected area. So they are the they are play also key role also in the management in the local levels out to the international level disaster management. And obviously don't they know have they the better know knowledge and data information about that area of disaster, so they can betterly give how much to betterly manage and assess all kind of activities to the disaster area, disaster specific societies or disaster prone sites. So they can be the local respondents to our donors, and either they are the leading donors, either they are rural basis, either they are in that region basis or area basis. So they will be also play key role in that international disaster management participants. So they are the key position participant as well. So up next is the if we go for the international base organization and national based framework for the disaster risk reduction, even we have studies in the international frameworks in the for disaster like Sendai. It is in the Japan. After right after the Fukushima and other that disasters that occurred in the Japan, after that the radiations passed out there. So there are many frameworks passed in the Sendai city of the Japan. So that framework for disaster risk reduction, on that basis 5 or 10 years policies were implemented for framework to be implemented. So in that basis the last and the recent framework for disaster risk reduction and international disaster management basis, that was the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and it was implemented and it was governed that priorities will be given to the four priority basis management of an international level for the disaster risk management. So in that basis, risk management reduction, it was implemented to be valuable, to be implementable, to be active, and the steps will be prioritized on in from the 2015 to 2030. Like it is upcoming last decade is also for that risk reduction framework and for the implementation of that international disaster risk management. So in that aspect, the fourth priority based goals were developed. Like first the priority was given to understanding the disaster risk. In that comes the policies and practices for disaster risk management. It should be based on understanding of disaster risk in all its dimensions of vulnerability, capacity, exposure of persons and assets, asset characteristics and the environment as well. So these priorities was to understand disaster risk, and that factors were given priority is one for the disaster risk reduction on 2015 to 2030. Up next was the second priority was to strengthen the disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. Like in that basis, the strengthening disaster risk goes for prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, as I have discussed in the components of the disaster management, and also rehabilitation is therefore necessary and fosters collaboration and partnership across mechanisms of institution for the implementation of instruments are the you can say the role or steps relevant to the disaster risk reduction and sustainable development. So that was the strengthening of the disaster risk governance for the sustainable development or sustainable development and manage the disaster related risks for rehabilitation. Up next was the priority number 3, which was investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience. Like to build resilience of certain community to manage risk, also to reduce risk or even to mitigate risk. In that aspect, public and private investment in disaster risk prevention and reduction through structural as well as I have discussed, non-structural measures are essential to enhance to capacity build, and then to economic or social health and cultural resilience of the persons or communities, countries and their assets as well as the environment was key in that aspect to be a betterly go for the disaster risk reduction framework. Last and but not least was the priority which about the enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better. That was the goal about the build back better was the aim and objective in that priority 4 aspect in recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction. In that aspect, very key points were mentioned for as aim and objective of that chart number 4, because in that aspect empowering women as well as persons with disabilities to publicly lead and promote gender equitable and universally accessible response, recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction approaches are key, because in that aspect every person was there to be active in that role of reconstruction and rehabilitation and all kind of activities in that disaster risk reduction and also the management components and key towards the resettling or sustainable redevelopment. In that aspect, disasters have demonstrated that the recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction phase, which needs to be prepared ahead of disaster, is a critical opportunity to build back better. That's why DR was mentioned, the build back better. In that aspect, the construction phase that was needs to be prepared, like preparation or preparedness and mitigation was need to be uh, make ahead to build back better in that aspect of the disaster risk reduction framework of Sendai for 2015-2030. So last part and last section is about the disaster risk governance. Next, what's actually disaster risk governance? In that last important part of the international disaster risk management, there are the 5 major steps or parts or components so that can be implemented or that is the part of the disaster governance that can be the part of the disaster international disaster management or risk reduction. The first is the structural change. The power distribution is the structural change or power is the power of the power distribution is crucial for the emergence. What does it actually mean? There should be it in that governance part, there should it suggests that there should be less command and control in the system and more trust and respect among the team members, as well as the respect in their own autonomy and their own self-respect. Self-organization building to empower the internal members to be strong and ready to share information. That was the first part of the disaster governance. And second part of the disaster governance, it is stated that the community, and it was also come under that umbrella, that community should also organize their risk management with the other related disaster risk management authorities are organization on the operating as well as operating teams, the support network from the civil society or regional local society, and the ability to raise resources and accept the external aid systematically. Like giving autonomy to locality in community means like giving the autonomous in all kind of activities or components of disaster management. Up next was the leaders might enhance their learning and adaptability. How? There should be the leaders or the supporters or the key players in that disaster management development, so that they should could be responsible and decide flexible according to the situation. They would be trustworthy, like if they are good leaders, visionary, able to be initiate self-organization as well. The second last part of that disaster governance is related to inter-organization coordination. So that is a very key part as well. They would be like these are their inter-organization. So their coordination would be best equipped with the enough information to make a decision for the better response and recovery, and they could feedback the progress in aiding in real time, like the better recovery or better response. Then the resources sharing would become more flexible. That's the disaster governance very key part, and also in on the social media and media perspective. The last but not least was about the regulations enactment, how these can be enacted and how they be acted in accordingly. The prevention unit, like accordingly, or the government or the legislative organization that are in the prevention or state basis, should emphasizes on the development and enactment, like they enact these kind of rules and governance policies. The process of authorizing the building permit application should stricter and really rely more on the local building control regulations. Like if there will be certain kind of code and conduct and standards we are implementing a certain kind of area or for implementing the reconstruction or recovery. So that phase for the better mitigation and better preparedness, these can be enacted as a regulation enactment under the certain regulation or policies of that disaster governance of the international disaster management are under the umbrella and under the light of the international disaster risk management and other related organization. So that was about the international disaster management, a brief about the international disaster management, what was the basis for that, what can be the participants and other related ideas and information about disaster international disaster management. What does it actually mean? What are it? What part can go for that, and what can be the disaster governance behind the international disaster management, and what can be implemented to for the better implementation of the disaster risk component. That's the components of the basic components of recovery, preparedness, mitigation, response, and preparedness for the better resulting or the rehabilitation of temporary development.